Welcome to the Athena SWAN Ireland Panellist training. This webinar is designed to complement the written panellist guidance, and if you have questions about any information in our training materials, please get in touch with the Ireland team via email. The purpose of this webinar is to support you as Athena SWAN Ireland panellists to make consistent, fair and effective decisions as you review and assess applications. This webinar has been developed and produced for new and experienced panellists who will be reviewing and assessing applications in Ireland. Applications may be from departments or institutions and may include applications using the Standard Charter Application Framework, the new renewals process and the interim process to facilitate enhanced inclusion of professional, managerial and support staff at bronze and silver level. If you haven't been a panellist recently, it may be helpful to flag some key changes. From the April 2020 round, panels have been convened online using a new format for discussion. The panel meeting time has been shortened as panellists submit written feedback in advance. Panels may also now review applications that incorporate the PMSS process as well as applications using the new renewals process. This webinar will provide information on different stages of the assessment process and offer some practical advice on how to be an efficient, fair and consistent panellist. We'll begin with a brief introduction to the panel process and to the role of a panellist in the Athena SWAN assessment. We'll then look in more detail at preparing for the panel assessment, including understanding and applying the criteria to applications and the completion of feedback forms. Finally, the webinar will provide information on the panel process itself, including logistics and practical elements of panels, roles within the assessment process, and how the panel process is designed to be supportive of applicants. Introduction to the panel process. The use of a peer review process in Athena SWAN goes back to the Charter's origins as a framework set up by the higher education community for the higher education community. Assessment of applications is undertaken by those familiar with the higher education context in Ireland, ensuring that award feedback and levels are relevant and realistic. The peer review process enables Advance AG to ensure that the assessment process draws on diverse expertise and that applications are assessed in a way that is impartial and fair. Panellists are drawn from across the academic and research communities and from a range of professional, managerial and support roles. This ensures panellists bring a variety of expertise and insight to the panel review process. The collective and external nature of the assessment aims to ensure that applicants receive feedback and outcomes that are impartial, consistent and fair. Much of the advice within this training will focus on how to remain consistent and fair and to assess applications in a way that uses your expertise to support applicants on their gender equality journey. Before we go any further, we want to say a huge thank you to each of you for volunteering to be part of the peer review process. You will all know something of the time, energy and commitment that goes into putting an Athena SWAN application together, and your involvement in the review process ensures that applications are reviewed and assessed by people familiar with the sector. The key roles and responsibilities of a panellist are summarised here and will be unpacked over the following slides. As a panellist, you will review and assess each application against the criteria. Your review of applications should seek to provide applicants with feedback that is clear, helpful and instructive and will support the applicant to advance gender equality in their institution or department. In the panel meeting, you will work with other panellists to recommend a result that can be justified to applicants, explaining clearly how each application has or has not met the award criteria. Advance AG staff will collate panellist feedback forms and notes from the panel discussion and provide applicants with written feedback. Before discussing the panel process, it is worth taking a moment to consider how unconscious bias may undermine our ability to review and assess applications fairly and consistently. Many of you will be familiar with the concept of unconscious bias. Unconscious bias describes preconceptions about or judgments towards certain groups of people that we form outside of our own conscious awareness. If you're unfamiliar with unconscious bias, you will find a short video introducing the concept on this slide. Let's think for a moment about how unconscious bias may affect how we interact with other panellists, as well as our ability to assess applications fairly and consistently. We all have people preferences, with our brains designed to instantly categorise people into in-groups and out-groups. We tend to gravitate towards people who are like us. These preferences often relate to demographic differences, such as gender or ethnicity, but on panels and when reviewing and assessing applications, other facets of our identity can be influential. These include our job role and institutional affiliation. Demographic differences can trigger unconscious bias, but stereotypes held about a discipline or an institution may also be triggers for biased behaviour. Status and experience can also play a part in bias. Are we a first-time panel member? What is our job title? How much experience do we have of Athena SWAN? These sorts of questions can determine who we identify with during a panel. Not only do we tend to see people in our in-group as more likeable, but we also see them as more competent and trustworthy. We are more likely to be influenced by their opinion and more likely to demonstrate our agreement, both verbally and non-verbally. People in our out-group, or who are perceived as less experienced than us, we may see as less competent. If we are unaware of this tendency, it can lead to micro-inequities. Micro-inequities are small, subtle behaviours that signal that someone is less important than someone else. During panels, this affects our assessment of others' opinion, as well as decisions about who we might interrupt during the course of a panel discussion. In this way, unconscious bias can affect our interactions as panellists. Let's look briefly at some examples of bias that can impact decision-making, so you can be conscious of these as you undertake your review and assessment of applications. Confirmation bias means that we only recognise the evidence that confirms our original impression and expectations. The halo effect means that once an entity is rated as good in one aspect, all other aspects are also seen as good. Horns is the opposite effect, where if one aspect is seen as poor, all other aspects are more likely to be evaluated as poor. An example of this may be setting too much store by the writing style or formatting of an application. Where we identify with an entity, we are likely to attribute their success to ability and effort, and conversely, failures to bad luck or factors outside their control. Where panellists come from a similar background to the applicants, this can be a factor. The opposite is the case for entities we do not identify with. We can rationalise their successes as being due to external factors and their failures due to a lack of ability. Comparison bias happens when we compare applications to each other rather than to the criteria. This bias means that differences, such as quality of analysis, are exaggerated. A factor that can have a strong impact on the performance of a panel is groupthink, where either the chair or a vocal, influential panel member expresses their view unequivocally and other members' views align themselves with this view. Groupthink can occur when panellists are unsure about their opinion or feel that others' opinions matter more than theirs. During a panel meeting, we do expect panellists to be influenced by a discussion that interrogates the evidence objectively, but not by subjective views. The Advanced HE moderator, panellists and panel chair have a role to play in challenging subjective statements and pointing to evidence in an objective and fair way. We're now going to look at how you can best prepare for the panel assessment. The preparation that takes place before the panel is the most substantial piece of a panellist's work. Panellists need to read and assess each application carefully in accordance with the criteria and return the feedback form that summarises their assessment to AdvanceHE before the panel. It's also worth noting that there is an Ireland higher education sector briefing document that provides some information on the sector and outlines some key differences between universities, colleges and institutes of technology. Usually you will be given 4 applications to review and assess. Applications are shared via Dropbox along with other useful information such as the handbook and panellist guidance document. You should set aside sufficient time to read the applications. Most people need 3 to 4 hours to review an application. We recommend spreading reviewing time out. The attention to detail required to review an application thoroughly means that it can be hard to assess more than one application in one sitting. When assessing applications, you will use the Athena SWAN criteria. It's important to familiarise yourself with the criteria and keep it in mind as an objective of reading applications. On the slide, you will see a summary of the criteria for standard charter applications in Ireland. The detail of the criteria varies slightly for institution and department applications, so when assessing an application, you should refer to the relevant handbook or to the criteria sheets in the written panellist guidelines. When reading applications, it can be useful to make notes of where and how applicants have met or fallen short of the criteria. This will enable you to recommend an outcome and provide focused written feedback. It's important to remember that small omissions of data or oversights in particular sections do not necessarily lead to an automatic fail. You should be judging whether or not applicants have addressed criteria in the round. As you can see from this table, there are specific criteria for bronze, silver and gold awards. The criteria is additive across the award levels. For example, in order to recommend a silver award, you must be able to justify how the applicant has met the bronze criteria. Similarly, to recommend gold, the criteria for bronze and silver must be met. You should be aware that the criteria for the expanded charter renewals process differs from the standard award criteria, with specific criteria applying to the various sections of the application form as captured in this table. There are 6 criteria for renewing institution awards, and 5 of these 6 criteria are applicable to departments. The renewals process may be used for institutions and departments holding expanded charter awards. This process is only for renewal, so you can't use it to upgrade your award, for example, to silver or gold. This process is also mandatory if you're an expanded charter award holder and seeking to renew at the same level. A reminder then of the criteria you will be working with. Award criteria for standard awards is additive across bronze, silver and gold. You will need to assess applications against the separate criteria for institutions and department awards. And if you're assessing a renewal application, you'll need to refer to the criteria in the renewals process. For the purposes of this webinar, to illustrate the process of reviewing and assessing applications, we're going to look at the standard bronze criteria. If you have any questions about how to apply the Athena SWAN award criteria, please contact the Ireland team. Achieving Athena SWAN bronze. The beginning of the criteria for bronze describes what the award level recognises, and then detail is provided on how this can be demonstrated. For institutions, a bronze award recognises that the institution has a solid foundation for eliminating gender bias and developing an inclusive culture that values all staff. For departments, a bronze award recognises that in addition to institution-wide policies, the department is working to promote gender equality and to identify and address challenges particular to the department and discipline. The criteria also notes 3 points to clarify how bronze recognition is assessed and we'll take each point in turn. So first, an assessment of gender equality, including quantitative and qualitative evidence and identifying both challenges and opportunities. Let's look at the text more closely. So applicants are required to demonstrate that an assessment of gender equality has taken place. In this context, this means evidence of a rigorous and thorough evaluation process. The criteria specifies both quantitative and qualitative data be presented. So, has data been presented? Has the data been analysed and reflected upon using a gender lens? And finally, has the applicant been able to identify the gender equality issues and opportunities in their context? Moving on to the second bullet point, applicants must have a 4-year action plan that builds on this assessment, information on activities that are already in place and what has been learned from these. Here we're talking about the issues and opportunities identified from the self-assessment and turning them into an action plan. We recommend in the handbook that the action plan developed is SMART, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. For our criteria, the most important parts of this acronym are specific and relevant. Panellists will want to assure themselves that the action plan provides specific actions to address the issues identified in the institution or department. Finally, there must be evidence of an organisational structure in place to be able to implement actions. The criteria specifies a self-assessment team, although applicants may refer to this group by a different name. Institutional applicants must also consider intersectionality. In the current Athena SWAN context, this means the intersection of gender and ethnicity. If institutions cannot provide this data, they must have a SMART action or a set of actions to collect the data in future. You will use the criteria to help you determine whether or not to recommend an award, and you will capture this recommendation on a feedback template provided in your panel pack. As mentioned, all panellists must complete written feedback for each application reviewed. You are required to submit your feedback before the panel meeting, and information on the deadline for returning feedback will be provided in the panellist email. Advanced HE moderators will read the feedback and collate high-level information before the panel meeting. This information will be shared at the beginning of the discussion of an application. The purpose of the feedback form is to help the chair structure the panel discussion, allowing them to see areas of consensus as well as where panellists' views diverge. Feedback is also used as an aid memoir for panellists, helping you to remember the key strengths and weaknesses and where they featured in the application form. The Advanced HE moderator will also use panellist feedback forms to form the basis of written feedback for applicants. In this regard, it is useful if your feedback is specific and instructive. The panellist feedback form is split into 2 sections, Section A and Section B. Section A is a summary assessment of the application as a whole, focusing on whether or not the application meets the criteria. Section B provides space for you as a panellist to capture your comments on each section of the application. You are required to complete all fields in Section A. It is not mandatory to complete Section B. You may find it helpful to record your notes on the application via Section B of this form. In this section, your focus will be on the relative strengths and weaknesses of each section of the application in relation to the criteria, and you may note examples of how the criteria has or has not been met. It is also helpful to include constructive comments on how things might be improved. Section A provides space for you to summarise and justify your award recommendation against the criteria. The panel discussion will focus on the areas and questions identified in Section A, and you should come to the panel ready to speak about these key areas. We encourage panellists to complete the form, bearing in mind that it will be used to provide feedback to applicants. Whether or not an application is successful, the self-assessment team will have undertaken a substantial amount of work to complete the application questions. The aim of the feedback is to be clear, supportive and instructive. We want applicants to be encouraged in their gender equality work, whatever the outcome of their application. You can ensure your written feedback is supportive by writing as if you were explaining the rationale for the outcome to the applicant. You can note examples of how and why the criteria has or has not been met. It's also possible to recognise good practice and strengths in all applications. Making suggestions on how applicants can improve their work and what next steps they should take is also helpful. You should avoid vague and unsubstantiated statements in your written feedback. A statement such as, "There is evidence of a self-assessment of gender equality in the department," with no reference or illustrative examples, will not be helpful to the applicant. Similarly, comments such as, "I don't think the action plan is strong," or "the action plan is not smart," will not help the applicant to progress. Moving on to what happens during a panel meeting. Panels take place remotely, typically via Zoom. Panellists will receive an email with the appropriate access information prior to the panel. If you have specific access requirements or queries or concerns about attending a virtual panel, please contact us so we can support you through the process. Panels typically run for 2.5 to 3 hours. On the day, there will usually be 4 panellists, including the chair. There will also be an Advanced HE moderator. It is also possible to have up to 2 observers in a panel meeting. We encourage observers because it is a helpful way for people to understand the requirements of the assessment process. Observers have no role in the assessment, but the chair may ask for their observations once the discussion of an application has concluded and a decision has been made. The role of panellists is to discuss the application content openly and honestly in relation to the criteria. The chair will ask a panellist to initiate discussion of each application. The speaker should outline their assessment of the application in relation to the criteria, highlighting where it has or has not met the criteria and why. The chair will then ask everyone else to add further comment. Chairs are requested to comment last to avoid leading the discussion. It's fine for panellists to disagree. Where there's divergence of opinion, the chair will facilitate an interrogation of the evidence. We encourage open and honest debate, and the views of each panellist should be considered. Panellists should remain impartial and fair. We ask that the panel discussion remain focused on the information contained in the application, rather than on personal knowledge of institutions or based on the reputation of institutions or individuals within it. It can be tempting to refer to external information, for example, if we know that an institution has done a lot of good work that has not been noted in their application. To ensure consistency, however, we need to stick to basing our assessment on a detailed review of the evidence presented by applicants. Finally, panellists must work together to recommend an award level based on the criteria. As we said earlier, panellists may respectfully disagree, and chairs will endeavour to work with the panel to reach a consensus. Where this isn't possible, a majority recommendation may be taken. There are a number of other roles in the panel meeting. Firstly, the chair. The chair will always be an experienced panellist. The chair has the same role and responsibilities as other panellists, but with some additional responsibilities. Chairs manage the structure of the session. They also manage time to ensure the panel can cover all the applications within the time frame given. The chair will have a brief meeting with the panel moderator prior to the panel to determine the order of applications. The chair also needs to make sure that the discussion stays relevant and linked to the criteria and is not sidetracked by irrelevant information. Chairs should summarise discussions so that the key points of feedback can be captured and confirmed to support the feedback to applicants. Once a recommendation has been made, the chair should summarise the reason for the decision. A key responsibility of the chair is to ensure that the recommendation made by the panel is justifiable against the criteria and is detailed, coherent, and reflects the panel's discussion. In the event that there is a split recommendation in a panel, the chair's recommendation will carry. An Advance HE moderator will be present throughout the panel meeting. The moderator is not part of the decision-making process, but is there to advise the panel on the criteria and panel procedure. The moderator will draw the panel's attention to the handbook and guidance as required, and can be called on to clarify points. The moderator also has a key role in ensuring consistency of award criteria across panels, so that, for example, the level needed for bronze on one panel is consistent with that of other panels. If the moderator has concerns about consistency, they will work with the panel to resolve this. The panel has responsibility for ensuring issues raised by the moderator are considered and addressed. If after a panel the moderator feels a decision was inconsistent, they can refer the decision to the head of Athena SWAN Ireland or to another member of the team as laid out in our guide to processes. A key responsibility of the moderator is to write up the panel's feedback for the applicant, ensuring that this written account is supportive, informative and constructive for applicants. In the event of an unsuccessful outcome, the moderator will deliver a feedback session to the applicant self-assessment team. There are a number of award outcomes that you as panellists may recommend. Panels can confer an award at the level applied where there's evidence that the criteria has been met. Where an applicant has applied for an award higher than bronze, either gold or silver, but the additive criteria has not been met, the panel may find evidence of criteria met at a lower level. For example, an applicant may apply for a silver award, but the criteria specific to silver has not been demonstrated in the application. In this case, the applicant may have demonstrated the criteria required for a bronze award, and the panel can therefore recommend a bronze award be conferred. Where an application does not meet the criteria, then the panel should recommend no award. When discussing applications and coming to a final recommendation, we encourage panellists to be supportive of applicants, taking the submission in good faith. Whilst discussing the application, we encourage you to speak as if the applicant were in the room, ensuring comments are professional and based on the criteria. Whatever the outcome, and however near or far an applicant is to meeting the criteria, it's important to recognise, acknowledge and reward the work involved in making an application. We encourage you to highlight the strengths of all applications and identify good practice and aspirations for progress. Finally, when determining your award recommendation, think about the submission holistically. The panel will probably spend more time discussing applications where there is disagreement among panellists on whether the application meets the criteria. These applications might be considered borderline. In general, we encourage panellists to approach applications with a generous spirit. You should avoid reading into minor data omissions. Omissions should only become fundamental concerns when they affect the criteria directly. If you're unsure whether an omission is fundamental, it can be noted in feedback and discussed in the panel meeting. In these cases, it is often helpful to go back to the criteria and application requirements and decide whether omissions and weaknesses can be dealt with through thorough feedback or whether they represent a fundamental failure to meet the criteria. To support applicants to progress their gender equality work, a minor revisions process will be available from November 2020 assessment round. Where applications narrowly fail to meet the criteria, the panel may request that the application is returned to the applicant for minor revisions. The revised application will then be resubmitted by the applicant to Advance HE. The Advance HE moderator will share the revised application with the chair, and the chair will recommend that an award is conferred if the revisions have been adequately made. To ensure minor revisions are used consistently, the panel should refrain from discussing minor revisions as an option until they have agreed whether the application in its current format meets the criteria. For applications that do not meet the criteria, that is, where the panel agree an award should not be conferred or should be conferred at a lower level, the panel should then consider whether minor revisions could effectively be used to address the unmet criteria. When considering whether or not minor revisions should be requested, the panel should be mindful that applicants must reasonably be able to complete minor revisions within 40 working days. Minor revisions should be limited to discrete sections of the application form and not entail a full rewrite of an application. Panels may ask for multiple minor revisions, but should consider whether the sum total of revisions is feasible within the 40 working days, or whether revisions are so extensive as to require a new application. Panels can ask applicants to further collect or analyse data as part of the minor revisions process, but should be mindful of the knock-on impact for the rest of the submission. Minor revisions should not be used as a way to perfect an application that on balance meets the criteria. Small omissions and oversights should still be addressed through thorough feedback. In order to ensure applicants are equipped to make minor revisions, the panel will need to agree which criteria have not been met and why, what changes need to be made to the application to satisfy these criteria, which sections, questions and page numbers need to be reviewed by the applicant and amended to address these points. The moderator will work with the panel to complete the minor revisions request form, and you can find a copy of this form in Appendix 5 of the panellist guidelines. On the screen you can see an example from a hypothetical bronze department submission. Here the minor revision request form notes that consultation data in section 5.3 is not disaggregated by gender, meaning that key challenges and opportunities may be obscured. As career development has been identified as a key area the department wishes to improve, the panellists want to ensure consultation data has been fully explored and that the action plan addresses the key challenges and opportunities in this area. The panel has requested that, if possible, the applicant disaggregate the data by gender, reflect on and analyse it, identifying any imbalances by gender and detailing how these will be addressed by appropriate SMART actions. With an example like this one, an applicant may not have collected the relevant data, so before requesting this kind of revision, panellists should ensure that the applicant has not already explained or addressed the omission. Before recommending collecting or analysing more data, panellists should consider whether these actions are going to significantly impact the applicant's self-assessment and plans to progress gender equality in the department. Small omissions of data can be dealt with through feedback to the applicant. This is another example of a minor revision. In this case, the request relates to a silver application. The panel are requesting that the applicant review and revise their impact boxes to more clearly articulate the previous context, for example, through adding baseline data. They would also like the department to indicate more clearly how they achieved improvement. After the panel. After the panel has finished, the panellist role is complete, with the exception of the responsibility to permanently destroy digital and paper copies of applications, and this also applies to observers. You must also adhere to non-disclosure agreements, remembering that you may not disclose your involvement in an assessment as well as any information gleaned from applications or panel discussions. Advance HE will use the notes from the panel meeting and the panellist feedback forms to deliver an outcome and written feedback to applicants. Results are typically returned to applicants within 12 weeks of applying. This brings us to the end of our panellist training. Thank you for watching and for your efforts in supporting the Athena SWAN Charter. Without your involvement, a peer review assessment process would not be possible. If you have questions, please get in touch with the team via email.